You find yourself standing on a hill, covered with scorched brush. The trees. Around you are black skeletons, brown, shriveled skins.
So we are talking about the low-budget movie 13 Demons. Now you may be thinking this is a fantasy film. I'd actually class this as more of a horror thriller movie. It actually focuses on three friends, all of which are kind of geeks, nerds, whatever you want to call them. And they like doing kind of video games, role-playing games, things like that. Now one of their number comes back to an apartment, not sure whose it is, and then he's managed to dig up this very old role-playing game called 13 Demons that was banned years and years ago because people used to play it and ended up going kind of mad and going on a murderous rampage, and it's kind of gone down in infamy. So these guys decide they are going to play it, and of course the game somehow takes control of them and they become deranged essentially and kind of are living this fantasy, and it essentially cuts between these guys kind of playing this game and then a kind of future scene where they're in the police station being questioned by police, and that's pretty much your story. Now you've actually seen this concept before. Back in the early 80s there was a film called Mazes and Monsters that starred Tom Hanks. Yes, that Tom Hanks. And it dealt with a kind of a similar issue because there was this kind of fear back in those days that Dungeons and Dragons would kind of be a bad influence on kids. So there was this kind of anti-Dungeons and Dragons film out called Mazes and Monsters, where this guy basically just gets swallowed up by the kind of fantasy and ends up acting it in real life. And it's essentially the same things here. Now it's hinted at that there may be supernatural elements to this, but it's never really overtly kind of said. So what do I think of 13 Demons? So director-writer Daniel Falaki, who also stars in this film, obviously doesn't have a lot of money. So this is a low-budget film, and it really, for the most part, takes place in one apartment. Now, don't be fooled by the cover art. Don't be fooled by maybe some of the images you see. It is not a fantasy film. There's not big battles of with monsters and stuff like that. The majority of this film, and I would say 80% of this film, is three people sitting around a table playing a game, and that's really the film. There's nothing really a lot more to it than that. If you are a fan of sort of tabletop RPGs, then you may get actually quite a bit from this. I think this is obviously made for people who are into those things. However, if you're not interested or you've never played one, this film will bore you, unfortunately. It is, and I've never really been into tabletop RPGs. My brother's very much into them, but I kind of am a geek. I kind of like the fantasy culture. But I've got to say, watching a whole film with people just sitting around a table talking, about playing the game, really, not even really talking about it. It is literally like a camera is just on three people playing Dungeons and Dragons. That's essentially the film, with a couple of other scenes here and there. So it gets a bit boring, and I've got to say, there's not a lot to it, and it tends to repeat scenes. For example, there's a scene where we have one of the guys who's getting questioned by the police, and it's like the police are saying it's just a game, and then the guy's saying it's not a game. And man, I swear that scene goes on for about 10 minutes of just this guy going, it's not a game, it is a game, it's not a game, it is a game. Man, it just gets a little tiring. Not a lot to this film. Kind of gets boring. I think it started off quite well. The premise is actually quite fun. So when I first started watching this film, I was kind of into it, but then I realised it wasn't really going anywhere, and we're never really told why this is happening. We're not really giving any explanation apart from there may be some kind of supernatural elements because we see pieces on the board move and things like that, but that's really it. So it gets a little bit frustrating after a while. I will say I thought the music here was really good. the music really does elevate some of the scenes and makes them quite dramatic. For example, there's just a scene where a guy is just reading, a description of this fantasy environment, and they have this kind of like orchestral kind of sounding music, and it really does, give you the feels to a certain degree. I also thought the makeup effects on these guys, as they literally sit in their apartment for days upon end, obviously becoming somewhat dilapidated, looks pretty good. Now, we do see some kind of, I guess, fantasy scenes where they are fighting demons, but they're all kind of in shadow on green screen. Yeah, the green screen looks a bit crap, but I think you can get away with it to a certain degree because it's obviously just in their heads. But the actual demon makeup is just like clearly in just some guy with a rubbish mask on, but you can't really see it because it's in shadow and stuff like that. Overall, I think the premise of this film was quite fun, but I thought the execution was lacking because it just dragged on and didn't really do anything different. Once the central premise is kind of set, it doesn't go anywhere. So ultimately it becomes quite dull, and you soon kind of lose interest, and what was kind of quite an interesting premise becomes quite boring. I mean, there's also the Knights of Badassdom, which was a similar sort of thing, but that was a bit higher budget, and that's, to be honest with you, a lot more to it than this film. Mazes and Monsters is the closest thing I'd get, but we never really even see much in the way of the actual murder side of it. One scene aside, that's all there is to it. Overall, I've got to say, if you are a tabletop RPG fan, this may be of interest to you, but if anyone else, I would say you'll find this film quite dull. So, I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.